Greetings, everyone. Hello. Let me get this straightened out here on my screen. There we go. Make sure this is working. Facebook is catching up. And I think we are good. Awesome. Great to see everyone. Welcome again to another one of my question and answer sessions. It's good to speak with everyone. I always love doing these. So let's just get started. So our first question comes from Lillian Branton. Should I take out another loan to fund the new location, set up equipment? I'm opening a new location to move from our current pet grooming salon. Our current location has building maintenance issues and can no longer suit our client volume. The new location's monthly lease rate is triple what I'm paying now. It has been very difficult to find a location that even allows pet grooming. Okay, so question, Liliana, for that is, if you're paying 3 times the amount of rent, what does that mean in terms of your pro forma? What does that mean in terms of your monthly profitability? Now, it sounds like you're getting a larger location, being that your last location couldn't fit the volume that you had. So theoretically, you're paying 3 times more, but I think you're going to have more capacity, and you're going to fill that capacity, hopefully, which is going to then give you higher profitability than you would have been if you stayed where you were before. So with that in mind, that's my first question is that, how does that all fit together, and do you have that figured out? You probably do. And as far as taking out a loan for the new location, well, you got to pay for it somehow, right? So whether it's a loan, whether the landlord is kicking in some build out for you, that's always a good way to do it if you get the landlord to help with the construction. And you can do equipment financing through a specific equipment finance folks, sometimes depending. Or you have to raise capital. You have to raise cash equity from investors. So those are really the only 3 options you're going to have in this particular case. So the answer would be make sure you're pro forma, make sure you understand what your cost structure is going to be at the new location, make sure you understand what your upside is if you are to start adding, revenue because you have more space now. And once you do all that, that'll give you hopefully a good, nice, positive number at your bottom line. Don't worry about how you financed it at that moment. Just get the bottom line figured out. And then from there, you can calculate, okay, now if I finance it, it's going to cost me this much in interest and principal on a monthly basis. Or if I have the landlord do it and boost up the rent, it's going to have this effect. It's always good to kind of model out your cost structure. Financing, not as part of the conversation. A lot of times people will, because they're worried about cash flow, will build their financing costs directly into their kind of pro forma, but don't do that. Just build it as if you had cash and you just paid for everything, and then at the bottom, that profit at the bottom would be just go back to you as return on equity. And then maybe you'll end up doing it that way, or maybe you'll use debt, or maybe you'll use some other method. It's always good to use, to not worry about your financing methods and figure out the operational side of it first, because that's really all that matters. And then you can use your different financing methods at the bottom after you figured all that out. The only time it really matters, from in a really specific way from a finance perspective, is if a lot of times in real estate, that's a go, no-go type scenario, depending on what financing is available and how you structure your financing. But usually in operating businesses, especially like what you're talking about, I think you really you don't really need to worry about how you're financing it at that exact moment. Just make sure it works on paper, that you can make a profit and a decent profit, and then you can figure out all the cash flow and financing stuff separately. So you're going to need some sort of way of paying for it, and debt is the middle cost, highest cost. So I probably said this before, but for those of you who haven't heard it, there's three types of financing, right? There's pay out of cash flow, which means your business is making enough money you could just pay cash for everything. That's the cheapest form of financing. The second cheapest is debt, so meaning like you get a loan or something like that, and then you have a debt and you pay interest. But if you pay off the principal, you don't have to pay the interest anymore, right? So that's the second cheapest. And then the most expensive is equity. A lot of times people make this mistake. They always think that equity is the cheapest because it doesn't cost them interest and it doesn't cost them if the business fails. But if the business succeeds, it's very expensive because not only do you pay percentage of your earnings forever, if the business really succeeds, it gets very big. That initial investment costs you a lot of money. So although less risky up front, of course. So yes, so loans are great if you can get them. Next question, Joe Nugent. When is it appropriate and timely to add additional services to my business? I own a home inspection company in Naples, Florida. My goal is to be at 25 to 30 inspections per week. We are not there consistently yet. I have an inspector who works for me and is doing great, so operationally I believe I'm set up for success. I'm just worried I may be jumping the gun and need to focus more on sales and bringing in more inspections, but the revenue lost by subbing mold inspection out and what I could add to my bottom line by bringing it in-house is pretty large. Okay. All right, so Joe, set up for success. You're not thinking. Okay, so as it comes to adding services, I would say beware of losing focus. Like you said here, need to focus more on sales. Beware of losing focus, right? You said it right in your question. Focus is like the key to success. We as entrepreneurs have a tendency to be distracted by things that can generate us just kind of incrementally a little bit more money because it happens to be there and sort of falls in our lap. So we then put all of our focus on that operational thing because it's something we can add or do or with our hands work on. And then, but the opportunity cost of losing focus from our bread and butter business is much higher than any incremental little bits of money that we bring in from there. So I would just say that's my first question: is when is it to answer your question? When is it appropriate and timely to add additional services to my business? I would say that you have to be aware if you're losing focus or you're actively pivoting. Maybe a way to think about it. There's nothing wrong with pivoting if you're deciding, hey, I want to go in this direction, or I can, if you could, I guess maybe one way to look at it is that you said you're going to possibly do 25 to 30 inspections per week. I would say that it would be within focus and be appropriate to add services if you genuinely believe that your kind of incremental revenue could be generated on 70% or better, or 50% or better, or pick some number of those 25 to 30 inspections per week. That's kind of like where maybe I would look at it. Like if you're only going to be able to, generate an additional 2-3 extra sales or sales to that same group, by adding these additional services, probably not worth the distraction. But if you're able to add, 50%, like, so if 15, 18, 20 inspections a week, you're going to also be able to add on this new service on top of the service that they're already doing, because you're doing the same sales process and then you're just adding revenue to that same sale. That's probably very much worth doing. That's a kind of a key distinguisher too, maybe when you're talking about adding services, is you have to ask yourself, can this service just be sold to the same market and the same people I'm already working to sell to? Or do I have to build a whole other sales machine and a whole other marketing machine in order to sell this thing? if you have to build a whole nother marketing machine, it's a distraction. Like that's going to be hard to do. So make sure your other businesses, it's two separate businesses at that point, right? Like, if you have to build a whole other marketing machine, if you can sell to the same market and to the same customer, just this additional service, and then you think you're going to be able to extract more revenue out of the same sale and out of the same acquired customer from the market, then that lowers the threshold of is it worth it or not, right? Maybe it's not worth it. Maybe you don't have to be at 20 out of 25 for the week. Maybe it's worth it at 10. Maybe it's worth it at 5. I don't know. It depends on what the margins are. But that's an important detail when you're thinking of adding services. Is it just an add-on from an operations and from a sales perspective, or is it an add-on from an operations and now I have to also sell something completely separate? Good question, worth asking whenever you're considering additional services. Yeah, so your mold inspection guys, if you're subbing out the mold inspections now, I would ask how many mold inspections are you subbing out, again, of those 25 to 30 a week in general that you're doing. And then also you have to know what is your margin going to be relative to subbing it out. That's another important thing to look at. If you, let's say you generate 20% kickback from your subs, right? You're getting 20% for doing nothing. Just by sending them over there, you get 20%. Well, if you're going to do it yourself and bring it in-house, you better be generating a lot more than 20% for the hassle. You better be making at least 40+%, double it, from my perspective, to make it worth the hassle of having to deal with it and make you responsible for it. I'd rather take 20% and have to do nothing than 25% and have to worry about it, right? So like keep that in mind as well. Kind of what your two options are, subbing versus bringing it in-house. Because top line revenue doesn't matter. Who cares about top line revenue? Profit per sale is going to be really what you care about. Also relative to how much effort you have to put into it. All right, cool. Good question. There's a lot of deep stuff in there. Jimmy Alexenko. What long-term marketing strategies can I implement in my business today that will fill my pipeline with clients? I am a flooring contractor and my main job is to install flooring in client houses. I subcontract for a flooring store and I also work with a lead company that sells me leads. Lately, the store and the lead selling company have been slow and I'm looking at new marketing strategies that will fill my pipeline with constant clients so that I can stay busy all the time. Great question, Jimmy. That's the question a lot of folks are asking all the time: is how do you, build a steady flow of pipeline, steady pipeline of customers for a good flow of customers. So I like one-to-many sales. Like I don't know how well your lead company sells. You buy these leads and then you go sell one by one, I guess. I guess it depends on what your success rate has been so far using that strategy. Whether that's worth it. You can also follow that same methodology, of course, with pay-per-click and all the digital advertising sort of stuff. I'm a big fan of one-to-many sales, like your flooring store relationship. You may make a little bit less per job, but I'd rather go out and try to sell myself to a bunch of different flooring stores or people who can send me business consistently versus going and trying to sell each one individually. It just, if you had 10 flooring stores instead of just one, and they're all able to send you multiple, opportunities a month, you can grow a really nice business just focused on that one-to-many relationship. We built a whole business in Chicago that we acquired a company, and they had a little program running like that where they had relationships with a related industry within Chicagoland area. And we took that model and just blew it up. We went like all in on that model, and it was all one-to-many sales. So we'd never sold to the end user. We only sold to these intermediary folks. And that business grew like crazy. And So worth considering as many one-to-many relationships, and then nurture those relationships. Those are not those are business-to-business type relationships. You don't just sell them once and you walk away and never talk to them again. You know, you build those relationships and you manage them, and you don't worry about, hey, did I get a sale today? It's more of like, you know, it's like building a relationship. You want to make sure that they know you and you know them, and they remember how to stay in touch with you and how to work with you. All right, cool. Next question comes from Sherry Morse. In selecting a location for your business, what are some key considerations? My fitness business will require suspension from the structure, which already limits my options. Most landlords won't approve this. I have 2 locations available currently. Location 1 offers great visibility, first gen, so more build out required, but it's a blank slate with a clearly dependable structure and generous TI allowance, tenant improvement allowance. It's in a newer area that's trending in our area now. However, it's a much smaller space with considerably higher rental rate. Location 2 is an older building with a quaint feel and is much larger space at a lower rental rate, so I have room to offer more services, adding to the bottom line. However, it's unclear if the structure can support the dynamic load required for my business without reinforcing the trusses until I do some demo and pay to have as-built CAD drawings done. It's also in an older area with smaller businesses. So look, I guess from my experience with location-based businesses where you're bringing in outside, like people are coming to your business and your whole business is built around them showing up. It's always frustrating, but I generally lean towards the higher cost but higher volume areas. I have a friend, this is a good example. I have a friend who's in the like mall popcorn business. He's been in the business like for a bunch of years. He's got a great business model. He's in a whole bunch of malls. And actually the decline of the malls in general is what's hurting his business. But this is the point. He's paying numbers that were like $12, $15, $18,000 a month for spaces that were like, you can't really tell how big this office is, but it's not super gigantic. And he would pay these huge numbers per month for rent. But the reason he would do that was because that was essentially his marketing, right? So he would take all of his marketing budget and really just put that towards rent because he knew that foot traffic was coming through, and that's how he generated his entire business, was from that foot traffic. So that was essentially his marketing, and then we didn't have any marketing costs associated with it. So if your business is going to thrive in an environment where there's lots of foot traffic, where people are showing up, they're going to see it, they're going to come in and out, they're maybe going to go to a grocery store or something else because it's part of their daily routine, there's a lot of value in those higher priced rental opportunities. Now, if you're more of a destination type business, where sure they're coming in from a long distance, or they'll drive a little bit further because they're there to see you specifically, then you can go with a little bit cheaper price, of course, and you can be a little bit around the corner, or you can be somewhere down the street or in an older plaza, because what you're offering is so much like you're going to drive them in there as a destination. It just depends on kind of how and why people are showing up to see you. In your case, being a fitness place, but you're a very specific type of fitness place, I would say that probably if you're not like way off the beaten path, like where people have to drive, people really for fitness stuff really only drive 5, maybe 10 miles. The industry like standard is 5 miles. That's it. You're only servicing people within your 5 mile area. Again, if you're something really special, maybe 10 miles. So that's worth looking at too in your area on one location versus the like where's your population center. And and the other thing is I don't know what the cost is, but it sounds like you're going to have to potentially do some structural work on that second location, and if the structural work is quite high, I mean, that might be a reason that if you took that structural cost and divided it out over 5 years, it might raise your relative rent of that cheaper location right up to where the other location was anyway. So that might be part of it too. Okay, so next question. Kevin Vinicky. When exploring the opportunity to acquire a book of business, what should you be looking for during the initial investigation, and how would you structure the potential deal to mitigate risk? I have been approached by a similar business to see if I was interested in working together or purchasing a book of business for bookkeeping clients. The current owner purchased this book of business previously and has since been hired full-time by one of the clients. This would be a nice addition if done correctly. I am looking for insight on how to handle this process and how best to protect myself. My biggest fear is that clients will want to leave after a second acquisition transition and potentially have overpaid or made a bad deal. Thank you. Oh, Kevin, this is an awesome opportunity for you. I love consolidations. I love roll-ups. And it sounds like, and I love the bookkeeping business, because the bookkeeping business is most of the time are fairly sticky customers for the most part. CPAs / bookkeeping or just bookkeeping are one of the cheapest businesses to finance per the SBA guidelines. So like if you were to just pay cash and get a loan, I don't know how big this is, it might not be that size of a deal, but the SBA, because of the risk factor of you losing all the business, is so low that they're very much the cheapest to finance. So that tells you that for the most part, bookkeeping clients, if they've been around for a little while and they've had decent service up to that point, are pretty sticky, and if you've got a little bit of a salesmanship to you and you talk to everybody and kind of, hey, we're still cool, like it's good, you're probably going to be pretty good with that. So what I would do is, look, it's just a present value calculation. So I would calculate the value of the present value of the cash flow of these customers over some period of time minus some discount rate. That's what you pay. And of course you calculate in your losses, your potential losses at the same time. You can even ask that, or if you're already in the business, you may already know it. What is the attrition rate? Is the attrition rate 5% a year, 1% a month? I don't know what it is. But if the attrition rate for bookkeeping or for your bookkeeping experience and this guy who's trying to sell this to you is 10% a year, we'll just take round numbers, you're going to lose 10% of it within the first year just for natural reasons. Even if you do everything right, nobody leaves because of the acquisition. So you got to factor that in. Then you factor in a kind of a discount based on if people are going to leave in general, like because they don't like you or they don't want to be transitioned again. Factor that in. And then whatever cash flow is left over some period of time, do your present value calculation on that, which brings it down to like what will I pay today for that and still get the return that I want. And then that's your calculation of what it's worth. Structurally, how sometimes people deal with this sort of thing, if your seller is so inclined, is just give them an earn-out. If the guy wants to sell it to you, give him a little bit of money up front, some portion of again, you do that present value calculation, you figure out what the number is you're targeting, and then you give him a little bit up front, and you say, okay, the rest of it's going to be an earn-out, up to some number. So maybe if you gave him cash today, I'm just making this up, it's worth $100,000. And so maybe you say to him, look, I'll give you $20,000 cash today, and I'll give you an earn-out up to $125,000 over the next 3 years. And once it hits $125,000, then whether it happens in 1 year or whether it happens in 3 years, once you hit $125,000, that's it. The earn-out stops. And if it goes, and if by year 2 you hit 125, it's over. You stop. No more. Then you don't pay anymore. It drops away. So he made more money than he would have made otherwise. And then you're also protected if everybody leaves or a bunch of people leave. You're really only out the $20,000. You don't have to pay unless you've got the revenue coming in, because your earn-out is a percentage of the cash collected from these customers. That's always a good way to do it. If the seller is amenable, earn-outs are the way to go for protection of the buyer. All right. Great opportunity though. If you want any, want to have a deeper conversation about that or structure that, I'm happy to work with you on that. Selena Mendina, what is a good way to develop a business plan? I have a service-based business, tattoos, and I have tons of ideas and fragments in text, but I really don't know the first thing about writing a business plan. What should I include? So I always like to start with numbers whenever I'm doing a new business plan. I don't even like the term business plan because people think of like those things. If you Google how do I make a business plan, they're going to give you these big long things with that are like 10 pages, 20 pages, 50 pages long with all this gobbledygook which doesn't mean anything. Whether it's a new business, whether it's a new product, whether it's a new service offering, at the end of the day, it comes down to the numbers. If the numbers don't work on paper, then they don't work. You need to know how many people you're going to be needing to put through the business, how many customers you need, at what price points are you going to charge. You need to know all this stuff. That's your business model, your business plan, as it were. I like to see all the numbers first because that also allows you to find all the issues, not all, but many of the issues before you even dig into it, before you even spend a dime. You make it work on a spreadsheet. Or a napkin or an envelope, whatever is the easiest way to do it. Spreadsheets are the best, frankly. Because then when you build a spreadsheet and you build your model on a spreadsheet with all the formulas and everything all linked together, it allows you to, well, what happens if I charge this much for my pricing? Well, what happens if I only get this many customers? At what point do I start losing money? At what point do I start making money? You can play with the numbers and just by changing one or two fields and really get a different picture of what it is, and then you know what you're targeting. So I would build a spreadsheet, a pro forma model of what my business is going to look like, templated, kind of create a P&L that allows you to kind of see what the future looks like, and then if it's not coming out the way you like, you change the numbers until it does, or maybe you abandon the whole idea because maybe in your market where the rents are so high, your type of business doesn't really work anymore. I don't know. I'm just you can identify things like that when you do that exercise of pro forma business model stuff. And again, I'm perfectly happy to help people when they want to work on that sort of thing because I love doing that and I do it all the time. Next question, Ricardo Delgado. How do I start a continued educational program for my business? I have an idea of doing an event every quarter and charging other barbers to attend as well. I have a plan to start an educational event once every quarter, helping other barbers learn new tips and tricks. I would charge them for attending. If there's any marketing strategies I should start doing before starting something like this. That's a great question. I guess it depends on how, if you're doing continuing education, the good thing is you know exactly who your market is, right? So it's, when you know exactly who you're marketing to, it's definitely easier than if you're marketing to the whole world. So I would just start by starting to communicate with people ahead of time, frankly. I don't want to do a lot of work before I know that there's at least some interest in what I'm trying to do. So I would start putting out perhaps a marketing, I don't know what you want to call it. You want to send out an email, you want to send out a postcard, you want to start, how do you communicate with this audience is my first question. And can I successfully get them to respond? I like to, as I've said many times before, I like to try to sell something before I've built it. So create something that says what you're going to be doing and start asking for people to respond and let them respond to you and then build it. And if you don't get any responses, then keep tweaking your messaging. Keep tweaking the way you do stuff and the way that you try to communicate in order to get it to work. And then build your product or your service, or in this case your educational event, based on the thing that gets the most response, right? As opposed to the other way around. Don't build it just the way you think it should be and then go try to sell it because maybe no one will care and you spent a lot of time working on that side of it when you could have really been focusing on market feedback and building to what the market wants. Next question, Gabriella Binkley. Should I validate my service and business processes before offering my services to the public? I am a prospect finder. I help independent professionals build their success network by reaching out to their ideal prospects. I've been working with my first client. I'm enjoying the learning experience. She is also enjoying this opportunity to do something she's never done for her business. This service contract covers a 3-month period. I would have preferred to teach her the prospect finding, contacting process. This would have enabled me to dedicate time to reach new prospects. I feel like this experience has given me a better way to market my service before sharing this with a large group of connections, like my social media contacts. Should I validate my service and business processes before offering my services to the public? Yeah, I think that you should, especially when you're on the marketing side of things, or you're teaching people on how to sell or market or acquire new customers. People in sales and marketing businesses always say something to the effect of, well, I'm gonna put you through my method with no guarantees that the method's going to actually produce a result. You're paying me to put you through the method, which is fine that they say that. The issue is if you want long-term sticky customers, that method better deliver a result that they want, because they don't really want to go through the method. They don't really care. They want the result that the method is supposedly promising to them. So if you want long-term sticky customers, so you're not constantly churning through customers, having validated services and processes that are going to produce a result for the customer, the result that the customer wants, is like the name of the game. I might have talked about these guys before. There's a marketing agency here in Florida, and they have a location in California as well. They went from 0 to around $60 million in revenue, $60 million in revenue in 4 years. And they did that with 19 clients. That was it, only 19 clients. And they had hundreds more that wanted to work with them, but they only took those 19 clients. And the reason is they knew exactly how their marketing worked, and they knew exactly how to drive results within a very narrow area of service and product and like the way that they did it. So if the business coming to them as a customer didn't fit that model, they didn't work with them. And they were very, very specific on who they worked with and what they sold and what they did and how they put it into their system. And then because of that, they were very, very successful for their customers, who then kept giving them more and more and more money because they knew that their system worked and produced the result that the customer wanted and needed. So I would just throw that out there to anyone at the end of the day, but especially for those who are in this kind of sales and marketing world as a service industry, is make sure you know that what you're saying you're going to do is going to produce the result that you're saying it's going to do. Because if you can do that and your customers are happy, especially if you're in the business of earning them more money, if you earn them more money, they will keep paying you, and they will pay you more and more and more, and they will tell their friends, who will pay you more and more and more. So yes, making sure that your business processes and everything are validated and they actually produce what you want them to do. Well worth the effort. Okay, that's it, everyone. Great to see you guys. If there's anything else I can do for you guys, you know how to reach out to me. Talk to Shirley. And then, don't be shy. I'm always happy to see everyone. I'll also see you guys in Nashville, whoever's going to be there in the coming next weekend, I guess it is. All right. Talk to you guys later. Good to see everybody.